Jane Robinson, and I will be your moderator today. I am from United Nations Environment Program. I know we're at the tail end of the stock taking, but we're going to give you a lively and energetic discussion for this high-level session. So please, and we will make time to engage with the audience. I know that's been an issue in some other sessions, but we are going to really try and make that time. So get ready to be part of the discussion. That's what we see this as. So the only other administrative note is that when we have a keynote that will be given in Portuguese, and the translation will be done in real time up on the stage, so you don't need to use your headphones. You will actually hear it in the main microphone system. So with that, let's get started. So here at UNEP, we see food systems transformation as a powerful lever to advance all the Rio Conventions, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and of course, many, many SDGs. And that's what this session is about. How do we use climate finance to leverage not only food systems transformation, but also some of the other co-benefits for the environment? As we all know, food's climate finance must urgently support resilient, sustainable agricultural food systems amid worsening climate impacts. I've been in a lot of sessions, and I think you've all heard the same statistics I have about the impacts of climate change on food systems. But I also think you probably heard the statistics that agri-food systems have the potential to mitigate up to 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, currently, they only receive 7.2% of climate finance. Smallholder farmers, which we've heard a lot about in the last few days, the last day actually, smallholder farmers are key to food security, but they only receive 1.1% of adaptation financing. So this is something that we need to shift, and that is the point of this session, to have a discussion about how do we make those shifts, how do we leverage climate finance for food system transformation in a systemic way. So you don't want to hear me, you want to hear this wonderful panel. So with that, I would love to invite up His Excellency Wellington Dias, the Minister for Social Development and Fight Against Hunger in Brazil. His Excellency is Brazil's Minister for Development and Social Assistance, Family, and the Fight Against Hunger. He's a member of the Workers' Party. He's had a long political career, beginning as a city councilor in 1992, and later serving as a federal deputy, 4-term governor, and senator. So we look forward to hearing your comments. Please. Please, Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Boa tarde, autoridades aqui presentes. Excelências, representantes de governos e organismos internacionais, da sociedade civil e do setor privado, demais participantes.
I would like to greet everybody in the panel this morning, this afternoon, and I'd like to thank everybody here involved. So, Excellencies, representatives of government, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector, dear participants, it is an honor to address all of you in such a representative panel.
É uma honra poder dirigir-me a todos e a todas neste painel tão representativo.
So, again, I would like to thank everybody, and it's an honor, again, to address everybody here. Thank you.
O relatório da Aliança Global para o Futuro da Alimentação mostra a lacuna do financiamento climático para sistemas alimentares, onde menos de 3% do financiamento climático está atribuído aos sistemas alimentares. Ao mesmo tempo, a segurança alimentar e sistemas agroalimentares foram as áreas mais afetadas por riscos climáticos.
The report by the Global Alliance for the Future of Food reveals a major gap in climate finance for the food systems. Less than 3% of climate finance is allocated to food systems, even though food security and agri-food systems are among the sectors most affected by climate risks.
O cenário que vemos hoje é de um financiamento fragmentado e cada vez menor. Anúncios de corte nos programas e orçamentos de ajuda oficial ao desenvolvimento se multiplicam. Os desafios seguem cada vez maiores, mas os meios de enfrentá-los estão minguando. Dessa forma, é urgente e necessário buscar sinergias entre os fundos existentes.
Today's scenario is one of increasingly fragmented and shrinking financial flows. Announcements of cuts to official development assistance programs and budgets are multiplying. The challenges keep growing, but the means to address them are shrinking. This makes it urgent and necessary to seek synergies among existing funds.
A Aliança Global contra a Fome e a Pobreza foi criada justamente para apoiar os países a mobilizar e alinhar recursos em torno de políticas que funcionam, lideradas pelos próprios governos nacionais.
The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty was created precisely to support countries in mobilizing and aligning resources around policies that work, led by national governments themselves.
Hoje, a Aliança Global reúne 193 membros, incluindo 101 países e 92 organismos internacionais, bancos de desenvolvimento, instituições financeiras e organizações da sociedade civil.
Today, the Global Alliance gathers 193 members, including 101 countries and 92 international organizations, development banks, financial institutions, and civil society organizations.
O que torna essa iniciativa única é o seu foco na implementação. A aliança não cria planos do zero. Ela atua para destravar o potencial de estratégias, planos, metas e políticas que já existem, que são eficazes, escaláveis e alinhadas às prioridades locais, mas que muitas vezes esbarram na fragmentação ou insuficiência dos recursos disponíveis.
What makes this initiative unique is its focus on implementation. The Alliance does not create new plans from scratch. It aims to unlock the potential of existing strategies, plans, goals, and policies that are effective, scalable, and aligned with local priorities, but often face fragmentation or lack of sufficient funding.
A visão agora é de financiamento previsível e coordenado para implementar essas soluções em escala, e a Aliança Global é uma ferramenta concreta para ajudar nisso, unindo políticas públicas e financiamento e parcerias em favor de quem mais precisa.
We know what works. The Alliance's policy basket was designed for the very purpose. What countries now need is predictable and coordinated financing to implement these solutions at scale. The Global Alliance is a concrete tool to support this, uniting public policies, financing, and partnerships for those who need it most.
A Aliança já está apoiando países na elaboração de planos de implementação de programas contra a fome e a pobreza no âmbito de um processo chamado Iniciativa de Aceleração, Fast Track. 13 países participam nessa primeira etapa dessa iniciativa, promovendo a inclusão produtiva rural na Etiópia, por exemplo, Ruanda, República Dominicana, voltado à proteção social, à primeira infância na Palestina e Tanzânia e transferência de renda na Zâmbia e Haiti, para citar alguns exemplos.
The Alliance is already supporting countries in developing implementation plans for anti-hunger and anti-poverty programs through a process known as the Fast Track Initiative. 13 countries are participating, promoting rural productive inclusion in Ethiopia, Rwanda, and the Dominican Republic, early childhood social protection in Palestine and Tanzania, and cash transfer programs in Zambia and Haiti, among others.
A adesão recente do Fundo Verde para o Clima A Aliança Global é um marco simbólico e estratégico, pois reforça a necessidade de unir esforços e fundos que integrem o social e o ambiental. O financiamento climático é essencial para assegurar recursos para programas que contribuam para a adaptação climática e, ao mesmo tempo, para a redução da fome e da pobreza nos países.
The recent accession of the Green Climate Fund to the Global Alliance is both a symbolic and strategic milestone, as it reinforces the need to bring together social and environmental financing. Climate finance is essential to ensuring resources for programs that contribute both to climate adaptation and to the reduction of hunger and poverty in developing countries.
Em nome do presidente Lula, faço um convite a vocês para a COP30, em Belém, no meu país. Lá iremos tratar, por uma declaração de líderes, de como a luta contra a mudança do clima também é a luta contra a fome e a pobreza, pois quem mais sente o impacto do clima são os mais vulneráveis.
On behalf of our President Lula, I would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to the COP30 in Belém, in my country. There, we will adopt a leaders' declaration on how to fight against the climate change.
É apenas se investirmos pesadamente nos mais vulneráveis, podemos criarmos resiliência de verdade para os pequenos que produzem nosso alimento. E apenas casando o social, o ambiental e o econômico, apenas assim, a luta contra a mudança do clima será também uma luta justa.
There we will adopt a leaders' declaration on how the fight against climate change is also a fight against hunger and poverty, because those who suffer most from climate impacts are the most vulnerable. Only by investing heavily in the most vulnerable, by building true resilience for the small-scale producers who grow our food, and by integrating social, environmental, and economic dimensions, can the fight against climate change also be a just one.
Não é mais possível buscar soluções sustentáveis que negligenciem as pessoas, combinar os habitantes de famílias já integradas no meio ambiente com as necessidades econômicas de manejo sustentável da natureza é uma forma promissora de inclusão socioeconômica.
It is no longer acceptable to pursue sustainable solutions that neglect people. Combining the knowledge and skill of families already integrated with their ecosystems, with the economic needs and sustainable nature management is a promising pathway to socio-economical inclusion.
A geração de empregos verdes, com o devido respeito à natureza, retroalimentando esse círculo virtuoso.
Green jobs provide the income necessary for local communities to live with dignity and in harmony with nature, creating a virtuous cycle.
No Brasil, temos celebrado parcerias para projetos de agrofloresta produtiva e mapeamos áreas degradadas, fazemos a recuperação do solo e a extração, por exemplo, de castanhas e frutos, insumos para fármacos e cosméticos.
In Brazil, we have been promoting partnerships for productive agroforestry projects. We map degraded areas, restore the soil, and support the harvesting of nuts and fruits, as well as inputs for pharmaceuticals and cosmetics.
Além de repor a vegetação, conseguimos uma floresta integrada às necessidades da população local. Com isso, valorizamos a diversidade do nosso ecossistema e a recuperação do solo, e ao mesmo tempo em que garantimos renda digna para essas famílias.
In doing so, we restore vegetation and integrate forests with the needs of local populations. We promote biodiversity, regenerate ecosystems, and ensure decent livelihoods for local families.
Estamos trabalhando a todo vapor com o programa Acredita, uma iniciativa ampla de inclusão socioeconômica voltada à qualificação profissional, vagas de emprego e acesso a crédito para empreendedores de baixa renda.
We are also in full motion with the Acredita program, a broad initiative for socioeconomic inclusion.
No ano passado, O programa Acredita já está mostrando a que veio. É um grande estímulo para romper o ciclo de pobreza, criar resiliência e proporcionar oportunidades reais para as pessoas de baixa renda.
Launched last year, Acredita is already showing results. It is a strong driver to break the cycle of poverty, foster resilience, and offer real opportunities to low-income populations.
Queremos levar ao mundo nossos esforços nacionais e soluções nestas áreas, assim como convidar outros atores a mostrar seus esforços para promover uma ação global coordenada.
We want to bring our national efforts and solutions to the global stage, and we invite other actors to showcase their efforts so we may promote globally coordinated action.
Temos exemplos muito bons como o marco de referência de sistemas alimentares e clima para as políticas públicas, para a organização dos sistemas alimentares em relação às mudanças climáticas, que tem o objetivo de fortalecer.
We have excellent examples like the reference framework on food systems and climate for public policies, which supports food system planning in the context of climate change, aiming to strengthen food and nutrition security through a just transition.
Este marco propõe meios e estratégias para regenerar, adaptar e transformar esses sistemas frente aos desafios climáticos atuais e futuros. O marco apresenta como princípios o direito humano à alimentação adequada, à soberania alimentar, à justiça climática, à sustentabilidade em todas as suas dimensões, a abordagens sistêmicas e ação conjunta entre governo, centrais e locais.
This framework proposes ways and strategies to regenerate, adapt, and transform food systems in the face of current and future climate changes. Its guiding principles include the human right to adequate food, food sovereignty, climate justice, sustainability in all dimensions, system approaches, and joint action between national and local governments.
Concluo dizendo, temos uma missão desafiadora à frente. Com tantos cortes e tantos desafios, não podemos mais nos dar ao luxo de dispensar um único dólar com atividades redundantes, fragmentadas, sem impacto.
I would like to conclude by saying we have a major challenge ahead. With so many cuts and so many crises, we can no longer afford to waste a single dollar on redundant, fragmented, or ineffective activities.
É preciso unir esforços. O financiamento climático não é apenas uma necessidade técnica, é uma escolha política, é a decisão de investir em um futuro em que ninguém passe fome, pobreza e desigualdade.
We must join forces. Climate finance is not just a technical necessity, it is a political choice. It is the decision to invest in a future where no one faces hunger, poverty, or inequality.
Assistirei com muito interesse aos debates e desejo a todos um excelente painel. Contem com o Brasil, contem com a Aliança Global contra a Fome e a Pobreza. Muito obrigado.
I look forward to our discussions and wish everyone an excellent panel, and also for our future, I would like to thank everybody as well, and we'll work together.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you for Brazil's leadership in the COP, but also thank you for giving us a real tangible example of the kind of alliances, the kinds of multi-stakeholder relationships that we can bring together for meaningful action for climate, for food, for nature, for jobs, and for many other benefits and dividends. So that is a perfect setup for this esteemed panel up here. I'm going to introduce the panel and then we'll jump right into it. I have a list of amazing bios from this group of people. I'm going to truncate them so we can get into the discussion, but I'm sure I won't do you justice in my introduction, so my apologies for that. First, we have Professor Chawa, who is the Secretary General in the Ministry of Environment and Nature Protection and Sustainable Development in Cameroon. And he's also the coordinator of the Network of Excellence in Land Governance for Central Africa. He has worked in a number of areas and published in a number of areas ranging from landscape dynamics, natural resource management, adaptation to climate change, land governance, natural hazards, and I think I can go on and on. So thank you. Next to me, I have Ruth Davies, who is serving as a special representative for nature for the United Kingdom. And Ruth has quite an impressive bio here. She's been the Deputy Director for Policy and Advocacy at the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, but she's served many roles advising the government in many different aspects of climate and nature. Thank you. Over here, I don't have them in order, so we have, I have Dr. Rola Dashti, who is the Executive Secretary at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Ms. Dashti is a leading economist and a long-term champion for women's rights, gender equality, and democratic reform. She has also a very deep background, particularly in planning, research, and development, and she has worked for major national, international, financial, and development institutions. Thank you. Then right here I have Philip Nil, who's the Director of Africa II Directorate, covering Central, East, and Southern Africa and the African Union. At the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ. He's worked also, previously he headed divisions in South Asia for climate policy at BMZ. And then last but not least, I have Peter Backer on the very end, our distinguished business leader. He's led the world and is leading the World Business Council for Sustainable Development as president and CEO. Previously, he's worked in global transport, postal and logistics company, and he was named Time Magazine as one of the top 100 climate leaders in business. So thank you for that. So with that, this is the panel, and I think we're going to jump right into the discussion. And as I said, we want to make this very interactive, so there won't be a lot. We're going to be turning to the audience very, very quickly. So let me go first to my questions. And my first question, I think I'm going to ask through Dr. Chawa, if that's okay. We've just heard a story from Brazil, but now we'd like to turn to Cameroon. And can you tell me how climate finance contributes to food system transformation, specifically looking at halting deforestation and other co-benefits through agroforestry systems? What's been your experience in Cameroon?
Thank you very much. I will start, let me put it in French, rather. Merci beaucoup pour la question. Je voudrais rapidement dire que le secteur agropastoral est celui qui a été identifié comme le plus vulnérable aux effets du changement climatique chez nous. Il est donc au cœur de la stratégie, de notre stratégie de développement, et c'est aussi le secteur qui émet le plus de gaz à effet de serre. Pour cela donc, concrètement, pour ce qui concerne ce que nous faisons pour financer, pour trouver des ressources, il y a un certain nombre de réformes en cours. La première réforme concerne un texte qui a récemment été pris pour réorganiser l'agenda climatique. Et dans le cadre de ce texte, le Cameroun a produit son plan national climat. Et ce plan a un chapitre, le chapitre 6, consacré au mécanisme de financement. Étant donné que la priorité est au secteur agropastoral, dans ce terme, par exemple, nous évaluons les risques budgétaires liés aux effets du changement climatique, nous identifions et on circonscrit les projets d'investissement sensibles au climat. On a également saisi l'opportunité de la révision de la loi cadre qui a été signée, promulguée en 1996. Récemment, pour réviser, on en a profité pour introduire tous les aspects récemment dédiés au climat, y compris le financement. L'autre opportunité, c'est la révision du plan national climat, qui est en cours grâce à un fonds de readiness du fonds vert, 3 millions de dollars. Et nous avons pensé qu'à l'occasion de cette révision, nous allons mobiliser tous les acteurs, et particulièrement le secteur privé, pour apprendre ensemble, avec la sensibilisation, comment mieux soutenir, à partir des ressources domestiques, des initiatives qui concernent les systèmes alimentaires. Je vais également rapidement identifier l'initiative Biofin, qui est une initiative de financement de la biodiversité soutenue par le PNUD dans le cadre de mécanismes de financement de la diversité biologique, notamment pris à Montréal. Et puis, il y a enfin une initiative très importante, la volonté d'accompagner des structures, des institutions nationales pour devenir des entités d'accès direct auprès de certains guichets de financement. Nous avons deux exemples. Le premier concerne la Caisse autonome d'amortissement que nous avons nominée pour être accréditée auprès du Fonds vert. L'initiative est bien amorcée. Le deuxième exemple, c'est la Banque des communes, qu'on appelle chez nous le FECOM, que nous avons nominé pour être accrédité au fonds d'adaptation. Je pense que pour ce deuxième exemple, le processus est pratiquement à la fin. Donc voilà, dans un premier temps, ce que nous faisons concrètement pour être sûr que le secteur qui est considéré chez nous comme le plus sensible et comme le plus important pour notre économie, voilà des mécanismes donc que nous sommes en train de mettre en place pour être sûr que ce secteur reçoit les ressources nécessaires. Merci.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Ruth now and ask Ruth, and I know Ruth is always very practical in her answers, so in really practical ways, how can financial institutions and development partners align climate finance between nature and food and ensure measurable co-benefits? And a bit of what are the real enablers to make that happen and work? Oh, you're far enough away.
Thanks very much. I'm always so far away because I'm so small that I can't reach the microphone properly. Thank you, Minister. That's very kind of you. I hope you can all hear me. And I'll try and rise to the challenge of being practical. I think it is really important at the beginning of the conversation, though, for me particularly and for all of us to remember to say thank you specifically to our Brazilian colleagues, because I think Minister Diaz represented very well the reality that Brazil is attempting to do something difficult, which is for the first time to bring these things together under an umbrella that recognizes that action on climate and action for nature needs to deliver against goals for people, and it needs to deliver against goals on hunger and poverty in a really integrated way. So there's something about us recognizing that that's quite a unique moment at COP30 and being able to lean in behind the efforts that our Brazilian colleagues are making that really matters. I'm also aware there's a lot of other work going behind the scenes at COP30, some of which I would like to sort of foreground, which I think is the kind of foundation stones for this practical approach. We're trying to unlock finance. We need to make sure we have the evidence base that really supports synergies. So we can't simply make claims and assumptions that it is the right thing to do, to work in a synergistic way, to assume that climate and nature finance and food systems work all stacks up together. We've got to be able to evidence that by being able to talk in a concrete way about the fact that food systems are absolutely at the forefront of climate impacts. To be really clear about the fact that nature and nature-based solutions and natural resources, including forests, wetlands, water, soils, underpin the future productivity of the agriculture system and are completely vital to ensuring that that system can support people's lives and livelihoods in future. And I think we also have to be absolutely concrete about the fact that the role of smallholder farmers and of family farms and of SMEs in the agriculture sector is hugely underrepresented, not visible sufficiently in the climate system. So there's something about actually being able to talk about them as solutions givers and demonstrating the solutions that they're bringing to the table, which means that we've got the evidence base that I think makes it unanswerable that we should be massively increasing the amount of finance that we're directing towards food and food systems. Once you've developed an evidence base, you also need a rational set of metrics. And as it stands at the moment, anybody who is working in the space that we're working in is probably facing, I mean, I could name immediately on the fingers of one hand at least 5 different systems of metrics that are measuring different things in different places to try to deliver outcomes in this space. There are different metrics under the UNCCD, under the UNCBD, under the UNFCCC. There are different metrics around Food Systems Summit, and there are different metrics around poverty and nutrition. This is very, very difficult if what you're actually trying to do is secure a synergistic agenda. And at some point, we have to make it easier for people in both the public and private sector to be able to measure the outcomes we want in a relatively simple and straightforward way. That is not an academic point. If you are a private sector player trying to think about how you align your investments against this range of issues, that is almost impossible to do if you're in a situation where there are so many different things for you to count that you simply cannot persuade your boardroom that this is a possible and sensible thing for you to be doing. So it's a very practical measure that I wanted to put forward. I think we're also beginning to see a move towards much more synergistic national planning. Again, if you're a national government right now, you're probably being asked to produce a plan for each of those conventions. All of them overlap with each other. You're producing adaptation plans, you're producing food systems plans. Can we find a way collectively to make it much less of a bureaucratic burden for individual governments who are wanting to engage with this to be able to develop an integrated plan which is driven by their own priorities that they have identified? It shouldn't be so difficult to do because it just seems to speak to a principle that I think all of us would adhere to, that successful investments are always going to be driven by the national priorities of countries, and they're also going to link back to what people actually need to support better lives and livelihoods. So I think those are some practical suggestions to get the framework right before we start thinking about how to unlock the finance, and those are the keys to the treasure house, so to speak. But I think we should probably also, very importantly, take on some responsibility ourselves in the way that we engage with the global system. At some point, we have to be able to make sure that if we're talking about climate finance, we're talking about the roadmaps associated with that, we're having a very visible conversation about what the scale of the gap is. At every point in that conversation, we make it clear and visible that there is a large gap which is focused on and needs to be filled around food systems and around that money actually reaching smallholders and SMEs on the ground. And then the final point, which I think has been talked about by many people across the course of the last 2 days, is we know that we're in a complex financing environment where there's pressure, and we also know that what people really, really want to access is long-term, sustainable, sensible private capital to be able to build their food systems in the way that they would like. What is it that we can do with all of our instruments brought together to be able to increase the appetite for risk or de-risk the investments of the private sector in a context where those people who are working on the ground, who are the solutions providers, who are the smallholders, who are the family farmers, who are the SMEs, are able to access credit and finance in a way that is suitable for them in their context over the long term. And that isn't a practical solution necessarily I'm putting forward, but I want to make sure that I've given myself that homework and all of us that homework to go away with, because it's probably the single most important question that's arisen in the last two or 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. And the importance of evidence-based and accountability frameworks, simplification in sense, which is easier to say than actually do, and then de-risking. Good enabling factors for unlocking finance, but I think I'll turn next to Dr. Dashti, because I think there's another enabling space that are needed to unlock finance, and that's in the policy space. And so my question for you is, what policy or fiscal reforms, including perhaps, I know I'm getting these words wrong, repurposing or addressing harmful subsidies, can help governments to create the enabling environment to unlock the kind of climate finance that we need?
Thank you, Doreen. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me add to what we heard today a simple truth. How government spends defines how food systems adapt. Public finances doesn't just fund agriculture programs. It shapes the direction of entire systems. When it is misaligned, it throws off everything, from private investment flows to how farmers even plan their next session. So if we want private capital to flow towards resilience, or if we want climate action to reach the smallholder in dry lands and deltas, then public investment must speak the language of transformation, not distortion. And here I come about subsidies. In the Arab region, like much of the global south, public agriculture support still leans heavily towards unsustainable models. Over 80% of subsidies goes into supports and goes into input supports, raw materials, and price mechanisms that favor water-intensive crops, fossil fuel use, and short-term productivity, at the expense of long-term resilience. These mechanisms are not just inefficient mechanisms, they are unaffordable in today's climate reality. Repurposing subsidies towards resilience is the first step. And here we're getting into, it's not about we want to spend more, it's about spending smarter and with purpose. This means redirecting spending to climate-smart crops and regenerative practices. It also means to expand digital agriculture and early weather warning systems. And most importantly, to strengthen the safety nets for small farmers, especially women, through insurance and inclusive finance. But also we need to go further than this. We need to have governments institutionalize climate alignment in their public investment systems. This involves climate budget tagging and reporting frameworks, so ministries can measure and steer public funds. It also means to embed climate risk analysis and adaptation metrics in the design and approval of public investment projects, and also creating a whole of government coordination linking agriculture, environment, finance, and planning ministries to ensure coherence between NDCs, food strategies, and fiscal policies. Second, we need to unlock and blend capital at scale. We just heard some of these examples. Governments can play a catalytic role by establishing a national food climate investment platforms that pool public, private, and concessional finance. Also using blended finance tools like guarantees, first loss capital, or concessional loans to de-risk investments in climate-smart value chains. And also issuance, as we're seeing now, innovative financial instruments like green and sustainability bonds with proceeds earmarked for food system adaptation, water access, and rural energy. Third and most important, we're seeing also regarding carbon pricing, also plays a very strategic role, whether through carbon taxes or emissions trading systems. Carbon pricing can discourage harmful practices, can generate revenue that funds rural transformation, and links small farmers to voluntary carbon markets, creating new income streams for sustainable practices. At ASQA, we are working with countries to explore these fiscal tools while building the analytic and institutional capacity to govern them fairly. But let us be clear, none of this is visible and viable without fiscal space. And as all of you know, many governments in our region and in the global south are constrained by debt and declining revenues. That's why we urgently need climate and food-linked debt swaps, which free up resources for adaptation and social protection. Also, we need access, we just heard also from Ruth, to long-term concessional financing, not just for projects, but for deep structural reforms, and stronger engagement from IFIs and multilateral banks to support country-owned investment plans, not fragmented projects, pipelines, as the Minister of Brazil just was mentioning. Finally, we must invest in data and accountability. We cannot manage what we don't measure. Governments need tools to monitor the climate impact of their spending and to track whether investments are reaching those most at risk, particularly small farm holders in fragile. As also the Minister of Brazil just mentioned, is not a technical fix. It is a political signal, and it's a signal that says our food systems will not be left behind in the climate transition. It's a signal that empowers farmers, attracts investors, and builds trust. And it's also a signal that makes resilience, not risk, the default setting for development. And thank you.
Thank you. Lots of practical examples in there, too. We can applause at any time you'd like to. But something you said really struck me was spending smarter and with purpose. And I think that's a big part of the challenge. So, Philip, how do we meet that challenge with public finance? How do we spend smarter and better to make food systems more climate resilient and unlock, we have all these targets about unlocking domestic, private, other kinds of resources, but we're not there yet. So what can we do to get there?
Thanks. And it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks, Rola Dashti, for this very good, actually, input, which covers lots of ground. A German, but certainly also much broader perspective on this, really, for sure, is ODA needs to be catalytic, strategic, inclusive. ODA is limited. We need much more, for sure. What does it mean, strategic? It's for sure align it clearly to climate, biodiversity, and food security goals, cover let's say, the global agendas. And we heard from Ruth how we have to bring it together much better. Catalytic, unlock private finance, innovation, but also unlock domestic resource mobilization. Much of it we've just heard from Rola. And finally, also inclusive. Really look at who should be the beneficiaries, who should be those who work with the money and make the best out of it. Smallholder farmers, but again, private sector, and so on. Now, maybe 3 points where we see specific need to engage more. First of all, when it comes to private sector and the financial sector as well, scaling blended finance to de-risk private investment. Maybe a good example is what we have been doing also together with Cameroon in recent months and years. Actually, not only Germany, also the world, actually, because we need them. And the Central African Forest Initiative actually agreed with Cameroon, and Cameroon agreed with the Central African Forest Initiative really to massively scale up finance for forests. Now, it's not only for forests, actually it's about the drivers of deforestation. And there, the agri-food system comes in very strongly with cacao, coffee, and other value chains. Actually, we agreed in Hamburg a few months ago, and we co-signed it between Cameroon, UK, and Germany, representing CAFI there. A $2.5 billion deal, including the private sector, including international finance institutions, including for sure ODA and CAFI itself, to make this work. And lots of this funding really is also coming from Cameroon directly, with their agricultural and let's say funding scheme. So this is a good example to be replicated and to be implemented for sure. This is a pledge. We have done many pledges. We have to do it now. So, but this is a good example. Secondly, mobilize really development banks. Also, let's say the national development banks. Refocus them also on agriculture issues. There's the IFAD Agri Development Bank platform we are supporting actually as well. But there can also be, when it comes really to mobilizing the private sector, there can also be pre-arranged financing concepts or arrangements, which is climate risk finance, insurance. How can you get in the insurance sector really to be part of agricultural insurance, harvest insurances, climate risk insurances? Again, there you need to specifically use also ODA or grants to mobilize smallholder farmers co-fund premiums and to get them into a more formal system of insurance questions when it comes to food security. So this is one. Secondly, really, I would just quickly echo harmful subsidies, domestic resource mobilization, fair tax systems, illicit financial flows. $90 billion flow out of Africa every year, much more than ODA flows in. We need to work with ODA money, with our joint support on systems that can mobilize much more domestic action. This is a very good thing. Only if there's strong domestic action, the agenda can be successful. So we need to be catalytic in that sense. And finally, let me just say a few words on, as third point, on ecosystem services, payments for ecosystem services and carbon markets. We should not be over-enthusiastic. We should not over-promise, but we should look very clearly what are the options. And it's very country and sector specific. There's absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution. But we need to be ready to really leverage this market and get into a better understanding how to fund and finance together what we need, which is climate biodiversity globally. So also CAFI is looking for a payment for the Central African Forest Initiative for a payment for environmental systems scheme. There's the compensation initiative, which really looks at agri-food systems and how environmental benefits can be served there. And we want to strengthen it and scale it up in the future. So thanks a lot. These might be a few points which can help the discussion.
Thank you. And thank you so much for bringing up the point of don't be I forgot the words used, but overcome the nuance that's needed to unlock some of the different kinds of finance. So you've touched on some of the private, but spoke mostly about public, but I'm going to turn to Peter here because we've heard a little bit about blended finance. We've heard about, I don't think we've said the word carbon markets quite yet, but how do we, from the business perspective, how can innovative climate finance really finance the kind of agri-food transformation that we need?
Cool, thank you. I know it's the end of the afternoon of a long summit, so let me change the outlook of this room here so that we all wake up. That would be nice. So when we talk about climate finance, most of you will think we need to move from one system to a better system, and how do we pay the journey? That is what I understand climate finance to be. But you're missing an important point, and that is physical risks in supply chains. And what I mean was that I'll illustrate it in an example. This is a real-world example with a real-world consultant calculating the numbers. A $12 billion beverage company where they grow commodities to make alcoholic beverages, wheat and grapes and whatever else they need. For each model, each location, weather models, climate models were applied. Millions of scenarios were run. The base case scenario, this is not the worst case scenario, the base case scenario of this company is that in 5 years from now, $1.5 billion EBITDA will be reduced to zero as a result of physical risk in their supply chain. So if you ask yourself, why is business here this week? It is not about some moral sense that we need to be in the room. This conversation has now shifted to one of resilience and competitiveness. And that's why business is here. And that's why business is so keen to look at what are the solutions that are available. And if you look in the ag and food system, then regenerative agriculture is one of the leading solutions that is out there. And so I have 3 points. 1, we need to move beyond pilots. We have admired all these pretty projects and showcased them long enough, we need scale. Second, we need accountability. So business is not afraid of being held accountable. Businesses report quarterly numbers, do roadshows, get being interrogated. There is a fundamental problem in capital markets, however. They're only interested in financial results, in growth, in profit, in cash flows. The environmental and/or social results are not part of that conversation. That is where the accounting framework comes in. But we do not need, to the point that Ruth also made, an additional accounting around. We need to work towards global standards. We have the ISSB, we have the CSRD. Those are the type of platforms that we need to integrate this conversation in. We also need a couple of new metrics. We basically need to rethink the way we link finance to this conversation. And the answer there is called avoided emissions. This was discussed for the first time in Japan during the G7. G7 endorsed the guidelines. They're now being turned into avoided emission accounting rules. So if a company or future, we can capture those in the avoided emission accounting rules. That will allow you to compare projects or companies or products on a like-for-like basis, which solution has more potential to reduce emissions. And that's where the finance flows need to go to. The last thing we need to do also in finance, we need to drive significantly more scale. So you may have heard that this week the Business Engagement Group, the FAO, the UN Global Compact, WBCSD, we launched a compendium. 15 co-investment real-world cases that are beginning to scale. One of those cases is how do we get regenerative agriculture in Brazil to scale? The calculations are we need $55 billion to just do the scale of finance is going to be massive. There will be need for blended finance, to de-risk finance, all the tricks in the book. But the one thing, and that's a thing that I can't resolve, but I assume smart people in this room can, it's easy to have the big project conversation, the finance conversation. It's apparently impossible to get financing down to the smallhold farmer that needs to make the change. That's another unlock we need. So thank you.
Thank you. So you asked us to shift our perspective. So, and that did. I'm going to shift the perspective of the panel. We're going to go in reverse order. And I'm going to ask you, we're at a stock taking. And that's what we're supposed to be doing here. How far have we come? And I think we've all heard we have a long way to go. So my question to each of you is, what is one bold thing, one different thing that we have to do that you think could be the game changer for unlocking finance or the kinds of partnerships we need to deliver on this mandate?
You want me to start? Well, for me it's implement avoided emission accounting in the ag and food system, because that will show the case of acceleration and scale.
I can think of political commitment and proper regulations for transformation.
Yes, I would say governance, national systems, and democratic.
Has to be read.
Thank you. I would go right to the top of the system, and I would say that we're not in a position where, at a macroeconomic level, we're yet serious about counting the value of our natural assets and then essentially making capital available at a sensible cost based on a relationship with those natural assets. So nothing really links our macroeconomic system in a rational way to our ability to be able to protect the foundational resources that actually support our economies. And if you really want one big thing to do, in my view, that's the thing that we would all have to collectively push on, because that would ultimately speak to Peter's point that we're in a position where, with the best will in the world, we still haven't got anything that enables us to put an economic value on the assets that actually support our economy.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense s'il y a une chose importante à faire du point de vue d'un pays du Sud, la première chose, c'est de se dire, ce n'est pas des grantes. Le financement ne vient pas des dons. Pour cela, il faudrait que nous ayons d'autres arguments pour négocier. Et ces arguments peuvent venir d'une meilleure comptabilisation de notre capital naturel. Je pense que si nous réussissons cette comptabilisation avec des méthodes qu'on peut comparer, des méthodes valables, on met sur la table d'autres arguments pour négocier. Et pour cela, la deuxième chose, c'est véritablement de faire en sorte que le secteur privé domestique rentre dans le jeu.
Great. Thank you all. So now we have a little bit of time. So I will take any comments, interventions, questions from the floor. Is there any? You'll just have to physically raise your hand so I can see you. Online. I see one back there. And please, and one here. So please introduce yourself, and please, if you could try and make your intervention within 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers, and also for the very interesting information that we have heard and some concrete recommendations. My name is Irish Bagilat. I am from the Asian Farmers Association, a regional farmer network in Asia. We have 24 members who are national farmers federation and cooperatives in 16 countries. So yes, we've heard earlier that 0.8 or less than % of the climate finance are actually being received by our constituencies, the small-scale farmers, fishers, pastoralists, and herders. And yeah, that's ironic, because if we look at the amount of food being produced by smallholder farmers and the food system. So we also, as a farmers organization, tried to consolidate our capacity, and we tried to also partner with other regional farmers organization in other parts of the world to be able to show that we are credible partners in actually allowing climate finance to reach our constituencies. And we have formed this platform, the Family Farmers for Climate Action, composed of about 7 regional farmers organizations. But of course, we know that there are a lot of barriers for us to access climate finance at the moment, and we have been talking in the past few days the need to really transform the climate landscape. So as a collective of regional farmers organization, I would like to get what's your concrete recommendation for us as farmers organization and cooperatives. Cooperatives are business entities that provide services like insurances. What's your recommendation for us to be able to actually access what is available out there for climate financing to help us transition and contribute to the transformation we are talking about? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the other 2 questions, and then we'll let the panel respond.
Hello, can you hear me now? Great. Thank you so much for the speakers. This is Yirgal from Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. I just wanted to make a recall to the climate financing commitment made by governments. And the question is, where are you now in terms of committing or delivering that commitment, particularly in order to address the food system transformation in least developing countries like Ethiopia? The other question is, I think the commitment from the private sector or the engagement from the private sector is still limited in terms of financing climate actions. It could be because of different reasons. And what is the level of engagement of the private sector, specifically in addressing climate challenge through climate financing? Thanks so much.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Janine Cooper, and I am the Special Envoy for to talk about something that was mentioned here, I think by Ruth, I think that's her name, the lady next to Doreen, I can't read that far, that nothing is linking our macroeconomic context to the climate financing and the kinds of things that we're talking about. I'll give the example of Liberia. West Africa's most important biodiversity hotspot. 48% of the Upper Guinea forest is in our country. We have the natural resources, we have the natural capital assets, and we are not managing in any meaningful way or significant way to access climate finance. Many of the reasons are because of things like valuation of ecosystem services to repay us for the valuable service we have of maintaining over centuries the third or fourth lung of the world in West Africa has not applied to Liberia, although it has been in existence with the World Bank and UNDP since 2008. Now there's a new one, the guidelines on avoided emissions. We can write thousands of pilots on that. What will it take for us to overcome that bias? It's hard to believe from our perspective that it is in the guidelines, and yet we have not managed to benefit from our climate ecosystem services that we have provided and continue to provide and will continue to provide. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to let each of our panel members respond. You can respond to all of the questions, one of the questions, or you can respond to a thought that popped into your mind before we wrap up. I will actually start over here with Dr. Chawa.
Thank you once again. Maybe I will react on what has just been said from Liberia. I believe the issue of really taking into account the natural asset and ecosystemic services is really important. Why don't we at the level of Africa organize ourselves and instead of going country by country, making sure that we are together and develop a sort of framework in which will enable us to really move forward. I believe it's a very important step. And coming now to the legal framework enabling private sector to engage from Ethiopia, our experience is that when you have a legal framework, in Cameroon, private sector is part of the National Committee on Climate Agenda, and it is in this single framework that all these things are discussed and planned. Thank you very much.
I'll reply briefly to both questions. Very briefly, in response to the challenge around access for smallholder farmers, the system is just not getting it right at the moment, and I think there is an openness to try to think about how much more direct access could work in this context. I mean all of us who are involved in the kind of climate finance landscape, I think need to be going out and talking to smallholders about the direct finance access mechanisms that you have found that work for you, and ask questions across all the institutions that we work on as to why those are not a bigger part of the story. So I don't want to pretend that the problem isn't as big as you're making it out to be. The only thing I can offer is that I think that there is a genuine interest in trying to find ways of reducing the enormous complex barriers between the money up here and how it actually reaches people on the ground. Some of what Philip was mentioning around payment for ecosystem services schemes that I think that we're working on with my colleague from Cameroon as well are partly in that context. And then I want to turn to the friend and colleague from Liberia, and I have to say, in a not very politically sort of nuanced way, that you have every right to be as angry as you are about a situation in which you were responsible for a vast part of the world's, kind of like fundamental underpinning infrastructure, and we haven't yet come up with solutions that enable funds to be transferred for you when you are basically performing a public service in the protection of those forests. I want to stay on a hopeful note because I think it's really important at the end of a conference to do that. I do believe that conversations are now happening about this macroeconomic challenge, which should get us into a situation where financial institutions that are kind of ultimately responsible for helping to set what the cost of capital is, what your situation with debt is, what the value of your assets are. That conversation is beginning to happen that recognizes we are all dependent on resetting that framework in a way that recognizes a natural asset base. I also genuinely think that our colleagues in Brazil and the forest countries of the world, that none of the ones that have been on the table have so far worked. And the one thing that I would say very much with a kind of UK and hat on and kind of thinking of my boss, our foreign minister, is that it's our job now to listen to the solutions that you bring, and there has to be a reason why we would say no, because we owe you, basically.
Thanks, Ruth, for being also so clear. Access also for, let's say, farmers' organizations. When we talk about the international funding, ODA, including climate finance for sure, with the Green Climate Fund and bilateral and also World Bank funding and so on, this is for sure, let's say, negotiated with governments, so there need to be national frameworks, national systems in the countries to make sure that the funds finally also flow in, for example, with farmers' organizations. Multi-actor partnerships, we've had events here that were talking about it. Systems need to be created also in country to bring together the different interest groups and build actually that goal of having sustainable food systems and building it in. Not an easy question, not an easy task, but I think that's very necessary when we talk about the more public funds. And for sure, the goal is really that should not remain public to public only. Yeah? No, there's a very important role of the governments, but there's then a very important role of civil society, private sector, science to push forward, and also of cooperatives and farmers' organizations. Yes, and I mean, we need to work on the direct access agenda in many institutions as well. We need to bring together these different goals in country, also in our countries, in Germany, in Europe. I mean, we face the same issues for sure of bringing together climate and food systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I also would like you to leave with an optimistic note, but unfortunately, talking about the commitments of climate finance, it's unfortunate it's not there. It's not met. There's a lot of talk about climate. There is a lot of commitment, and especially from developed countries, the $100 billion commitment every year, we haven't seen it, and it's not there. That's unfortunate. Second part, but there is a lot of talk. But we still need to have the voice. And developing countries and the global south needs to keep raising the voice because it's extremely important. And talking about grant and small farmers, it's unfortunately when these commitments are made and these grants are made, it's made at the macro level, but not seeing, despite the fact that we are recognizing that types of funds and big amounts to the small farmers. So the green climate funds and all these different climate funds, it's unfortunately first it's burdensome of papers and requirements which they need to revisit the way they function, and there needs to also be, because the nature of we're dealing with, we need to deal, it's like the small businesses, okay? It needs to have special vehicles. You can't have commercial banks to give small businesses because it's not their business, it's too costly for them. The same thing when we're talking about climate finance, we just not only need to have funds for the bigger mega projects, but we also need to think in parallel to have a mechanism for these small farmers. And these were the narrative and countries and the discussions should be done. It's not only thinking about the big picture, but in parallel, which we are not seeing, but there has to be the voice going on as we go along. And the third, and I think what Liberia is talking about is extremely important. When you price the cost of environment on these types of investments, and when huge investments are coming to the country, there is a price for also the absence of this pricing, this emission cost, and the destruction of environment. You always will be seeing abuses, and we're not going to go into, and then we'll have this problem of the planet and the countries. So it's government regulations, it becomes a very big, important issues. Thank you.
So we need to get pragmatic about carbon markets. It's super simple. We can't fix climate without carbon markets. What the UK, Kenya, and Singapore have launched recently is amazing. That needs to be scaled up. That will pay for services. That will also pay farmers for the carbon they sequester through their Regen Ag practices. But we know that the first few years of a farmer changing their practices, they will need funding, and that's an unlock which we haven't found yet. Private sector can do a few things. Long-term offtake agreements is one, recognition of those carbon credits in their payment, but that's not going to cover it all.
Thank you all. So I also am an optimist, but I am also a realist. And we've gone over, and there's no way I can summarize the conversation we've had. That's the realism in me. But I just want to say thank you to the panel, to the participants, to those of you who have been online for this rich discussion. I know it's a low energy part of the event, but we managed to bring some energy and good ideas into it. And again, collectively, we will continue to move together. So thank you very much.